Today we're going to talk about the idea of teaching reading using graphic organizers and specifically thinking maps. And while this won't be a instruction on the maps and organizers themselves, we will talk about how to use them before, during, and after reading, and why to use them before, during, and after reading as tools for helping our readers better engage in decoding the meaning and thinking about the structure of the text that they read. So a little bit about what graphic organizers might be. So when we think about a graphic organizer, it may be something as common as the plot diagram used for a short story, really just kind of a way of laying out the sequence of a short story, or the very common fishbone diagram. I'm a fan of thinking maps, so a couple of examples of those. This is the double bubble map, where we compare two things and we look at their similarities and their unique qualities. Same thing as a Venn diagram, really. This is a little bit different. This is a multi-flow map, and here you have an event, the causes and the outcomes, so a way of kind of structuring a look at cause and effect, cause and outcome. Or a simple flow map, very common thing. This is a process of what happens next, what happens after that. And then the tree map. And the tree map is a way of taking a large topic, breaking it down into its smaller parts, paragraphs, sections, that kind of thing, and when we think about reading. And in this case, it's just looking at the language of addition, language of subtraction, but a really common organizational structure for a piece of reading, especially in social studies, informational text of all sorts, research papers and that kind of thing. So those are just some common examples that might help us think about what is it we mean when we think about graphic organizer or thinking map, to capture what a text looks like when we break it down. So we want to think about using these things before, during, and after reading. When we engage our less sophisticated readers before reading, we're trying to get their brains tuned up to encounter the text. Less sophisticated readers don't tend to do that. They don't have much of a conversation with the text that they're reading, and they don't tap into prior knowledge particularly well. So the idea of before reading is we may give the students a partially completed graphic organizer or thinking map. We may just kind of put in some keywords. So you see here is one. We've given them a tree map, a very, very incomplete tree map about the inner brain, hypothalamus, thalamus, basal ganglia, hippocampus. We could leave a couple of those blank. And the idea is then for the student, before they read, to make a guess. What do you think you're going to read about? And they can probably tell they're going to learn about those 4 topics, and we're probably going to find out more details about them, so we have space for details down below. But it gives them a sense of what language are they going to encounter, how it might be structured, and it allows them to make some predictions and be ready. Their brains are tuned up then to receive the word hypothalamus, thalamus, when they encounter them in paragraphs and sentences. So it helps the readers anticipate the content and the structure of the text they're going to read, and it allows them to make some predictions. They may make really wrong predictions, and that's okay. The idea is that they do predict, and their brain is tuned up, and then when they read it, then they're already familiar with the terms. They're kind of correcting their false understandings, their guesses, or confirming them as they go. So really helpful tool for getting students to do that anticipating and predicting, is that kind of partial thinking map or graphic organizer. And the main thing we want to think about probably is during reading. And when students encounter a text that's going to be challenging for them, especially if it's something that is at or above grade level. And we know to grow them as readers, they have to encounter texts that are a little bit above their grade level. Otherwise, they don't grow. So to do that, we very often want to think about pairing them. We don't want to do popcorn reading. We want to pair them up, sit them two by two, and have them take turns reading. That way they don't have the whole thing to do on their own. They get to read some, they get to listen some, but they're still really highly actively engaged in the reading process. And they have a lot of responsibility for making meaning of it. So during reading, we may use a partnered reading process, and one of the strategies that we've talked about before, like think aloud, say something. There's great strategies to use. So during reading, the thinking map helps the reader decode the structure of the text, and that's a lot of what we're after, helping them understand text structures, and it helps them visualize the information. So we understand here's the main event, the Tang Dynasty took power, but we can also visualize then here are the causes of that. So and then here would be the outcomes, the effects of it. So great little tool for thinking about visualizing information instead of just leaving it in paragraphs where it can be kind of overwhelming and confusing to them. It allows students to see the connections between the big ideas and the smaller details. Again, one of the things that less sophisticated readers can struggle with is see what's a big idea, what's a smaller detail, how are these things fitting together. So it gives them a chance to kind of visualize how writers craft that information. The other thing that I really like about using a thinking map with a reading assignment is that it replaces reading guides and study guides. So instead of sitting there writing a bunch of questions about things that they're supposed to pick out, it says, you know what, here's a kind of a sense of what you're encountering, sort it out, give them more or less guidance with that, but you don't have to write a lot of questions, which then they see the questions, all they do is hunt and peck for the answers anyway. I know that's a little bit more cynical than it needs to be, but we know that students find their way around doing reading guides and study guides. A partnered reading activity where they create a thinking map for the less sophisticated reader, but really for any reader, really challenges them to make some sense of the structure of the text and the ideas in it. And it takes a lot less time to create a thinking map assignment than it does a study guide. So I advocate that for sure. So they've read a text, they've created a thinking map, a tree map, a multi-flow map, a flow map, whatever it might be, and they're done. Except we want to do some after reading work. We want them to engage with it a little bit beyond that. So thinking about that, right? So they've got the whole map. They're able to see the relationships between pieces of information and the whole text. So a young reader here, obviously reading about dolphins, and has organized information about what dolphins look like, how they feel, what they eat, etc. So they've broken some things down through their research, through their reading, and they see how those things are related and grouped. It gives them a visualization of the structure of the text that they read. But then ultimately it gives them a tool to look back to write their own summary. So we come back here, and this student can then write a paragraph quite easily about dolphins, how they look, feel, what they eat, the fact that they're mammals, that sort of thing. So what happens then in that after reading process is the student has to kind of pull that information back together and write a summary paragraph or whatever it might be. And then they become masters of that information, at least a little bit more. They work with that language a little bit more on their own, instead of in terms of like putting it into sentences and making sense of it, making meaning of it, pulling out the big ideas. And that helps it stick with them and helps them understand ultimately what they've read. So when we think about teaching reading, we may think about many ways for engaging students before, during, and after their reading. But graphic organizers and thinking maps are a great and pretty easy way to really help those readers out. So give it a try.